We'll get going. Okay. So I'm hoping you're enjoying this, and maybe I should just give you a little more introduction. This is a lady from the Diocese of Texas. It used to be that they offered annual opportunities to be trained in Invite, Welcome, Connect. And as she does in the story, in the narrative, she sort of says, look, there is some hesitancy around the word evangelism, but really evangelism is just about connecting people with God's good news and how their story intersects with God's and vice versa. And maybe there are ways we can do that, not shyly, but, you know, not flamboyantly either. And that's like a really good thing, sort of, as long as it's happening. And if you'll bear me out, I want to tell you a story that happened to me this week. You know, I wear this thing around, and in general, like, I'm pretty identifiable with what I do. But in some ways, with the way that I grew up, I'm also kind of really slow to be like, you should come to my church. It's great. I think this is a great church. I mean, I absolutely love it. But I wasn't just really slow to tell people that. So I met somebody new this week in the neighborhood because of the swim team. And it turns out this person's a runner. And I won't bore you with the details, but I will tell you this one part. I asked this person, oh, like, are you training for a race? And I said, yeah, I'm training for a long distance race for the first time in a while. I think I'm going to do a marathon. And, oh, where are you going to do the marathon? Boston. Well, y'all may not know this, but that's sort of a really big deal, you know, because it is, right? Like 1% of marathoners qualify for that race. Qualify, let alone run it. So I'm talking, and this person's like, oh, I've seen you running, and what are you doing, blah, blah, blah. And I sort of said, well, you know, I run at different times. Got a really flexible job here in the neighborhood. And she said, oh, are you a teacher over there at St. Thomas? And I said, no, I'm the priest. And, you know, like, I wasn't ashamed, but, you know, like, I just have to tell you, sometimes that changes the whole dynamic when I use that word, like, this is what I do. And well, she became even more interested. She was like, oh, do you ever give the sermon? And I was like, well, just only sort of every week. And, you know, like, she asked about it. And I, you know, like, I find myself sometimes saying, like, you know, they're really great people. The sermon can be really long and boring sometimes. And, you know, but it's a beautiful place for that to happen. And, you know, I don't know if it's because I'm Southern or what it is, but I even get really squirrely with this stuff. I do. I get squirrely with it because I didn't want to take like an opportunity for a friendship and turn them immediately into a parishioner. That's just like kind of weird, you know. That's what I want to say. So I think this book is a great opportunity to talk about some of those tensions in our lives. And quite honestly, you can decide what we want to do, but to talk around words like evangelism and whether they mean anything for us anymore. And this is often a thing we forget, right? We use this word invite, but the real question is, what are we inviting people into? To me, that's like really important, and maybe it's just the way I'm wired. Are we inviting people to join a social club? And that's fine. Are we inviting people to believe what we believe? Are we inviting people in who are different so that we can listen to what they are and possibly change ourselves? Are we inviting people into a God that doesn't really like them but might love them? Are we inviting people to a party every Sunday? I mean, that's what she says. To me, there's a lot bound up in that. And so here we are, ready to discuss that this week. And that was probably more of an introduction than you wanted. So maybe I could start by asking you, and you don't have to do this, before we talk about the content just a little bit. How did you get connected to the Episcopal Church, or how did you get connected to the church? Do you have like a story about your connection? And if you say, well, we just always grew up going, was there a moment where you made a decision, I'm going to keep going? So if you're willing to put up with that, I'd be grateful. Graciela.
Yes. We came because I was taking a class, and Tim too, right, with Samuel Gladden, and it was when you were doing the icons, and he was very, and he's a fun, interesting person and very engaging and all that stuff. He's fun to have in a class, and he told us about his church. He referred to it as his church. And this is where I go. We're having this icon show. And if you don't know what an icon is, he sort of got into that. And so it was because of Samuel Gladden. So Tim, we both signed up to do the icon class. And as it turned out, I got ill and didn't do it, but Tim did it. And if I'm not mistaken, you guys sort of worked at the same table. And so anyway, that was the beginning of our journey. And then we just started coming. And I feel, how can I say it? You have a very, or your church or our church has a very welcoming feeling about it from the standpoint that it's like you're, I find it hard to put into words, Mike, but it's easy. It's easy and loving. There's a loving aspect about it. That's and there's a couple from St. Bernadette's that we happened to run into the hallway the other day, who is looking for a new church family, as they said. And I think they're coming too. And I'm hoping that whatever it was that Tim and I said to them invited them. So,
thank you.
You're welcome.
Susan?
I was working in Oklahoma City for a law firm. And we had bounced around a couple of different kinds of churches, denominations, and hadn't really found one that spoke to us. And my boss invited us to go to All Souls Episcopal Church in Oklahoma City. And I don't know, something about the minute I walked into the church, it felt like home. And that was when they did morning prayer 3 Sundays a week and communion 1 Sunday a week. And I don't know, the act of kneeling at the rail just was very powerful to me. And then when we moved here, we decided to try St. Thomas, and the very first person I met outside the door was Ellen Cook. I think there's a lot of people in our church who she's the very first person that they meet. Yeah. And we got to talking. We had daughters in the same grade at Seabrook Intermediate. We both played bridge, and she said, "Would you like to be on the altar guild?" And I said, "Oh, am I allowed?" Because at the church in Oklahoma, it was like passed down in wills from mother to daughter. That was the only way you could get in. And so I've been on altar guild ever since 1984. But we've gone through some difficult periods in the church where we weren't as welcoming. But your personality is just so open and inviting to us that we feel the same way towards others. I think we do a much better job than we did in the past.
Thanks, Susan. Carolyn?
Okay. I was raised Methodist, and Methodist ministers in my family, and always went to the Methodist church, even in college. Moved to Kansas City to teach, met Dwight, got married. He was Episcopalian. And so we started going to the Episcopal Church in Overland Park, Kansas, where, I can't say now, our former bishop was rector. Wimberly, thank you. Don Wimberly was the rector there. And I just really liked him, and his wife was wonderful. And I went to the group to join the Episcopal Church, took the classes. That was very good. Megan was born. We were there for a few more years, moved to Kansas, went to the Episcopal Church. There were 3 Episcopal, not Kansas, moved to Nebraska. There were 3 Episcopal churches in Lincoln, Nebraska. we tried all three of them and had no problem choosing the one that we attended for our 7 years there. And came back to Kansas City, and our church there where Wimberley had been had changed, and we still went, but we weren't there very long, less than 2 years before we were moved to Texas. And I'm trying to think who I met first when we came here. We tried several different churches in the area, but this seemed to be the one that fit our needs. But I know Ellen and Susan and Leslie Keenan and Jennifer Raddick. We've been a tight group for all those years since the, I don't know what, 85, I believe. And I've always felt like this was a very warm, welcoming church. I will agree that there have been some times when we weren't as welcoming as we could have been, but that has changed, and I'm very glad to be a part of it.
Thank you.
Okay.
Rhonda and then Ellen.
Okay. I grew up United Church of Christ, and then our family got baptized in the Baptist church when I was 16. So, I was that into my 20s. But yeah, I met my husband, Mike, and he's from England, Church of England. And then his very, very good friends, who Ellen Cook knows, Marcy and Ellis Kirks, invited us to St. Christopher. And I really like the Episcopal liturgy, that you do different sections of the Bible and the gospel, like every Sunday. And I really felt like Episcopalians are really keeping on topic, where in other churches, it kind of like was off on tangents and stuff. So that really appealed to me, and just the intellect and the beautiful music. And I just felt like, oh gosh, this really clicks with me. You can do deep analysis, but just really follow Jesus is, I think the most important thing. But the atmosphere is wonderful. We switched over to St. Thomas because we just had way more NASA friends there, and have just loved it, the whole time.
Thank you. Ellen Maston.
Well, I was introduced to the Episcopal Church by a very good friend. We both had children, our first children at the same time. And so we got together and talked to child rearing and everything. And as years passed, I was pregnant with my third child, and I was not well. And September came, and Mariana said to me, I know that you don't feel well, but it's time for Sunday school, and would you like me to take Liz with Ricky? And then, you can come later if you'd like. And so she brought my child to Sunday school for months. And I kept saying, well, someday I'm going to have to come to this church and see what it's all about, because I don't know anything about the Episcopal Church. And that was how I was introduced, and been here ever since.
Thank you. Ellen Cook.
I was always an Episcopalian. We moved a lot, and we attended church more or less. Mostly my sister and I went, and my parents. And my dad worshiped God on the golf course, is what I was told. So anyway, we always, every time we moved, we found the little blue sign, and we found the closest church, and we went there. And in fact, I was confirmed at in California, but my first communion after that was we worshiped in a Quonset hut in the middle of the desert in China Lake, California. So we came here and found the sign, and I came, and the next day, the minister came to call, and people were friendly, and he was very good at incorporating people. And he said, okay, well, here's what you're going to do. And he introduced me to some other people. I said, oh, I can't do that. My husband flies. He won't be there. He said, that's okay. And he had Betsy Bronson and Florence Martin standing by to take care of Beth while I did whatever it was he wanted me to do. And it's an example of part of the connecting thing that's in this book. I've heard Mary Parmer do the thing before, and I really believe passionately in not just the numbers. It's meeting people's needs and making them feel really welcome, not just, hi, it's nice to have you here on Sunday. So I'm excited that we're going to do this, and hopefully come up with things that can implement or supplement what we're already doing.
Thank you. Janet, please.
Well, I may lose my train of thought in the midst of this, but Craig and I were Methodist, and we had 2 children, and Craig just became unhappy with the church that we were going to. And so he decided to stay home with with our children and let me go to church. So that was fine with me. And so I went on to the Methodist church. Then we had a child that needed to be baptized. And, you know, I had all the wrong reasons. I didn't know why the baby needed to be baptized. But I told Craig, I said, I don't care where we go, but I need to have my baby baptized. So, you know, so then we started looking around, and we had lots of friends in the Episcopal Church in Monroe, Louisiana. And then we went from
Uh-oh.
I apologize for being late.
Yeah.
What is the question about?
Oh, I'm putting it in the chat. Janet,
Thank
I think you froze on us for 1 second. I'm sorry.
Okay. Well, that's all right. But then, but then we were, and you know, in those days you could not receive communion in the Episcopal Church,
Yeah.
and that was a big thing to me, and to you know, to learn about that. And but
Oh no.
the realtor said, "Oh, you'll be interested to know that your next door neighbor is an Episcopal," because she knew that Craig was a retired Episcopal priest. And so Carolyn came over, and I mean, just, you know, welcomed us. And it wasn't just to the church; it was it was to the world. You know, that's the way Carolyn is.
Technology is great
And
when it works.
so yeah, so you know, and then nobody forgot my name. The next Sunday I came, they remembered me, and that's a little bit rare. And I've done a lot of visiting as a priest's wife in the Episcopal Church, and you know, we're not particularly welcoming all the time. So I've been there when it wasn't welcoming, and I've been there when it was, and I think we're doing a good job. And I think, Mike, you've done a good job in giving us something to talk about. So thank you.
Thank you, Janet.
Good morning. I'm Claire. I'm sorry I'm late. I'm not sure what happened. My little alarm didn't go off, but I really love this question. I have been kind of bounced around. I was a cradle Episcopalian. My father was a cradle to grave Episcopalian, but we grew up partially in Latin America. So I am confirmed in the Roman Catholic Church as well as the Anglican Church, and then baptized and received in the Episcopal Church. And through my adult time, I have been open to and tried many, many different types of denominations. You know, I keep coming back, and I feel most at home in the Episcopal Church, and I really, really do feel very, very welcome at St. Thomas, and from the very get-go. So that's what I wanted to share.
Thank
St.
you.
Thomas is wonderful.
Remember, this isn't a forced share, not a forced share. If you want to answer this, oh, Julia, please.
Hi. No, I appreciate what Janet said because I feel the same way. I have 3 boys that needed to be baptized, and well, I guess 2 at that point. But we had moved back to the Houston from Birmingham, where I was doing my training. And I grew up in the Episcopal Church in Houston, but in a completely different part of town. So it was too far away to go there. It was too far away. And so we moved to Nassau Bay. We rented a house for a couple of years while I was doing my fellowship training, and had Peter, and we needed a place to baptize him. And so I remember I called Mike, and you asked me a question like, why didn't I want to go back to the other, or why was I not going to the other church? And it was too far away. Like it was, you know, not close enough. So that's kind of what brought me back to the church, was having my kids and wanting them to have a place to, or wanting them to have a church, right, and have an experience for understanding faith and religion and what that means. And so for myself, that was really important. And I think what was really nice was I remember coming and listening to some of the sermons, and at the same time trying to like keep my boys in line, you know, like keep them like, you know, it's like that, you know, as a mom, your brain is always going in multiple locations because you're like keeping track of your kids and trying to listen. You're like constantly multitasking. And so, you know, I couldn't pay full attention to all of the sermons because I was, you know, trying to take care of my kids. But I remember just listening to some of the words and being like, this is something I'm not sure I've heard before. And I really appreciated that. And so I think that's kind of what kept me coming back. And then just this idea of sort of meeting me where I was. I think, Mike, you said like, you don't chase people. And I think that was really comforting to me, because that's a little scary for me if somebody's, you know, kind of chasing you in a way, because it makes me feel like, well, what if I don't have the right faith or the right beliefs, you know? And I never, I think here is where I felt like, oh, it's okay if I don't have the right beliefs or the right faith. It's that's not really what it's about. Anyway, so that was me.
Thank you. Oh, Susan.
I just wanted to say, one of the things that I particularly appreciate about you, Mike, is how welcoming you are to young families with kids. You know, they misbehave. They wander the halls and the aisles and climb on the pews, and you are so welcoming to those kids and families. And I didn't grow up in churches like that. And when my daughter was young, I didn't have ministers or priests that acted like that. You always felt kind of condemned if you couldn't keep your child in tow, you know. So I love your welcoming to children. I really love that.
Well, I really appreciate that. And I think maybe this is like one of the opportunities I think the book wants to suggest, which is like, let me tell you an evangelism story about that. When I started going to church with my son, I went to an Episcopal church for the first time, and it was so reverent. I grew up very evangelical, and everything was serious all the time. And that's one of my personality flaws, to be honest. And so, you know, he would move the kneelers and they'd slam on the floor. And my blood would boil, you know, because like I grew up in church where children were not to be hurt. And so my poor son, I mean, he's 6, he's got like ADHD, and he's just fidgeting around. He wasn't allowed to, but we'd go bowling afterwards. So I think that was good for him. It was like half price bowling day. So that's how we started, and then here's the real story. I got here to St. Thomas and I had a 3-year-old, and my wife wouldn't even hear for 6 weeks. She was still in San Diego. And so I bring Emery to the nursery. She's 3 years old. And the nursery did this really cool thing. They brought kids in for communion. I was super grateful for that. But mom wasn't in church, and mom makes it a policy not to go to church for a lot of reasons. And so, one Sunday they came in for communion, and the little girl saw her dad, and she just ran up there and climbed on me and hid under the table. And boy, my blood started to boil. I heard my inner voice of my mother who raised me saying, you don't ever do that, and you don't make noise. But I had this, in this moment, I had this sense like, well, what are you going to do? What I was not going to do in the middle of the Eucharistic prayer was tell my kid, you better go sit down. And probably just, I don't know, I'm going to call that like inspiration of the Holy Spirit. I was inspired not to say that. Now, inside, I was just absolutely trembling, but somehow I just kept going. And I'm just going to call that a holy moment. I just kept going. And I prayed the prayer, and she did what she did. And many of you know that wasn't a one-time deal. And oh my gosh, I can't tell you, however confident I seemed to be, I was just inside a mess, and I remember like Liz Corley gave me this message of evangelism. She said that was the most beautiful moment I've ever seen in church in my life. And I started crying when I saw that, because I've never seen a child feel so welcome and comfortable in the chancel. Now, I give thanks to God. That was the first comment I heard. Because a few other people didn't like it, and they chose, instead of coming to me, to circulate that around in the community. And, it took care of itself. But, I think I had like this, I'm going to call it an epiphany, because I wasn't even formed in the moment, but I just knew not to tell my daughter, you better sit down. I knew not to do that. And I didn't know what else to do. And that was evangelism. Liz Corley represented the gospel of Jesus Christ when she said that was really wonderful. And I think I took Liz really seriously. I'm still trying to say like, boy, as important as I want to make what I have to say or something else, that is not the most important thing. And I get it wrong still a lot, but Liz Corley invited, welcomed, and connected me with the gospel. And you hear that I'm using this language that makes me feel a little bit yucky inside because of the way it's loaded up. Evangelism, inspiration, revelation, gospel of Jesus Christ. That was all in that story. And I continue to try to figure it out. Because, look, I'm like, geez, you're 5. You ought to know better than to do this. But I still know not to say that in the middle of Eucharistic prayer. Darlene, I think you've turned your mic on, so maybe you're going to share.
Yes. My journey to this St. Thomas Church has been a long one, but I'll make it short. I grew up in the Baptist church, took all of that in, but when I began to be late adolescence, young adulthood, I realized that did not fit me. It did not fit my social justice mission in life that I felt I was called to. So I left the church for a long time. And then in kind of during adulthood, I was going through a personal crisis and needed the church. So I found a wonderful Episcopal church in West Texas, in Lubbock, Texas, of all places, that was inclusive, unofficially, didn't make the statement, but I saw people participating in the Eucharist who I knew were LGBTQ. And they also had women who were active in the Eucharist, and I mean in the service. And so, and that church was very worshipful. And so I felt like I fit there. And that's where I was confirmed in the Episcopal Church. A few years later, I left Lubbock and came down here and participated, joined a church in the area that was not like that at all. They were very anti-social justice issues, or that particular priest was. So I kind of felt betrayed. What I should have done was look for other churches, but what I did was leave the church and did not participate in church for, I hate to say it because you'll kind of know how old I am, about another 30 years, almost 30 years. And I had been several years ago, 3-4 years ago, I'd gone through several other personal crises and was needing again to reconnect. And here's where elements of the book come in. Kathy Hill was a yoga buddy of mine. And so we shared stories sitting on the mat before and after class. And Kathy got to know me, and she said, the church I go to, I think you would be a good fit. And so I thought about that, and I had driven by St. Thomas every day for a long time and kind of felt a pull. And then one day I drove by and I saw the announcement for Jenny's ordination on the marquee. And I thought, oh my gosh, they're ordaining a woman. This is a good sign, another good sign. So I came to St. Thomas and was embraced. I just felt so welcome. I'm glad I came at the time when you guys were welcoming. And I've been there ever since. I just really appreciate the inclusive atmosphere, and it's official. We are officially inclusive. The intellectual approach to the Bible and the openness to alternative interpretations, and the worshipfulness that I find in St. Thomas. So I'm grateful to be here.
Thank you. As a follow-up question, and I think you've already mentioned this, part of what the author says in the introduction in the first chapter is that, we're always really happy when we find something that's really life-giving for us to kind of share that with other people. And I do that with like, hey, have you been to this restaurant? I do that. Or I listen and people say like, hey, I've had this health challenge. And I'll say, well, have you tried this thing? Everybody gets excited when they've been somewhere before, right? And I just wonder, part of the feeling, and I had to do this with fundraising a couple of years ago. I was at a diocesan camp, and we were going to do a capital funds drive, and we had to read this book by Henry Nouwen on the theology of fundraising. And really what it said is like, sometimes we get really squeamish around things like funds, but the real question is like, are you vested in the mission? And if you are, why are you worried about supporting it? And that was really like freeing for me. But I hear the author asking this question too. Sometimes I think we're a little bit quiet about like what we do. Maybe I'll just speak for myself, because I really don't want to be pushy. But I think the real question is like, what about your church do you wish other people had? And I don't know if you're willing to take that one on. Some of you have already done it. What about your church do you enjoy so much that you wish other people knew about what's going on? Susan, please. Oh, you're on mute. This is awful, isn't it? We'll get this figured out.
We will. The sense of community and family. I mean, I feel like the people I interact with at St. Thomas and the Women's Forum and the Bible studies are family. And I'm here by myself. I don't have blood family around me, but I know that if I needed something, there's people I could call and they would be there to help me. So that's a big part of what St. Thomas is for me, as well as learning. I'm constantly learning something new.
Thank you. Ellen Maston, please.
I think the thing has meant the most to me through the years is the sacramental nature of the church. And I think that would be the first thing that I would want to share with other people, because it's made such an enormous change in my life. And the other thing that means a lot to me is the solid theological footing that we have. I trust what is said in this church and believe that it's the true gospel. So those would be the two things I'd most want to share with others.
Carolyn, Judy, please. And then I see Ellen Cook.
Having been in Katy for a little over a year and debating about going to, there are 2 Episcopal churches out here, and one of them I know will not be a fit for me, and the other one sounds like it will. I haven't been there yet. And I keep procrastinating. I keep putting that off because even though I'm not attending in person St. Thomas as much as I would like to be, I still feel welcome and a part of the community. And St. Paul's is really going to have to go some to get me there. And we'll see. Eventually, we'll see what happens.
Thank you. Ellen Cook?
Well, as I said, I've always been nominally an Episcopalian, but I, at this stage in my life, am more open to some changes, and I'm learning more about what makes it so wonderful to be an Episcopalian. So my faith is still growing and changing, which I really appreciate. And one other thing I wanted to say in the reading that we did about, for me, it's sometimes hard to break down invitation and welcome and connection into separate little categories. I think they overlap a lot. Yeah. But one of the points Mary makes is about learning people's stories and listening to people's stories. And you can't necessarily do that well on a Sunday morning. So the things that we do in turn, like yesterday, the food thing and watching your children help. Things like when we have in the past been able to go to Camp Allen as a church, or when we do social things, all of those are where we get to know people's stories better.
Yeah. Thank you. I want to take a turn if it's okay. And it's weird because I play this weird role here. And so one of the things I really love is like, I see that it's moved past toleration of quirkiness to like some appreciation. I actually, a couple of years ago, I told this story in church about how some lady gave it to me about being this bad priest because I had ink on my arms. And one of the parishioners on the way out said, "I don't care if you've got those or not." And like 2 people other in line said, "I do care that you have those because it means something to you. And I appreciate that." And that was the gospel message. That's what I heard. That was the gospel message, is that means nothing to me, but I appreciated that it means something to you. That was really, really great. And I just have to say for my own self, and I know it's probably tiresome for other people sometimes, but one of the things I wish is that people who grew up with, frankly, a life-taking faith had an opportunity to say, like, you don't have to throw that away. You actually can like make several turns, and this can be really life-giving. Like, the Bible can be awfully abusive, but it can also be really liberating. And knowing those stories and being able to have a conversation with it can take something you thought was an albatross and really start to like give you some wings. And I want people to have that. I do, because it's important to me. I don't want to dismember the faith life I was given as a kid, but I do want to grow some new roots in it. And so I'm really like hopeful about that here. Darlene?
Mike, that's one of the things I appreciate about how you guide us through biblical interpretation and understanding, is that you have given new life to scripture that I have been railing against, or I had been railing against for years. Scripture that drove me from the church, along with those people who tried to pound that into me and other people, prohibiting people and behaviors. And what you've done is just use that same scripture and defined it perhaps as not as, what is it, not prescriptive, but descriptive. And that's helped me go back and say, okay, I don't have to be angry at that scripture. I don't have to reject that scripture. So I can find new life in biblical passages now.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm asking a lot of questions and I haven't given room for like what the book so far is doing for you. So let me just back off from like directed questions and make some space for this. As you've read into the book so far, are there kind of thoughts or maybe questions that she poses that really spoke to you that you'd like to respond to or hear from the group?
Well, I'd like to kind of know why you selected this particular book, and what is your hope for it?
Yeah, thank you. Well, Tim, this lady is actually like one of the national leaders in the Episcopal Church for doing things formally or informally about how it is that we, frankly, practice evangelism in a non-pushy, gross way, but that we do it. And so I guess my really hope is that we'll think as a group hard about ways we're doing this and ways we might deepen or extend the invitation, welcome, and connection that we do this. And, you know, one of the grossest words for me, because people have stolen the meaning of it, is the word evangelism. And I sometimes I think, well, we should just give up on it. And another part of me says, why should I let people like rob our language of like beautiful words and limit them when there's an opportunity to say like, no, like I refuse to give up on that, but I also refuse for it to be flattened and used as a club. So I think part of that's the goal. What she says in the program that's really interesting is like, this isn't a program, it's a ministerial vision. And so I think that's a really interesting thought. I think we could flip to the appendix and start having like logs and like things like that. But what I would like us to see is deepen our ministerial vision. She doesn't use that word, that's Dolores Williams' word, but having just read it, like that's, that's what I want to use, ministerial vision. So that's my hope. Graciela?
Yeah, one of the things that I've thought about, and I don't know how to face it or how to discuss this exactly, Mike, but in our neighborhood there at the church, you know, St. Paul's.
Yeah, St. Paul's.
St. Paul's is there. As you look at the apartments, there are a lot of Spanish speakers in the area.
Yeah.
And because I am a Spanish speaker and grew up speaking Spanish before I spoke English, when I've attended St. Paul's, there is, and I've gone through periods where I've attended and gone regularly, but that part of the welcoming and of the singing in Spanish, that was really powerful. The fact that a sermon is given in Spanish and the people that respond to it. And I know that can't happen, and you can't go, where are you going to knock on doors and find a Spanish minister, and it's a very complicated question. And so I don't know how, I'm not presenting this as a question. I guess I'm asking or saying, do you think about that in the neighborhood, and do you have any thoughts about it?
Yeah, and that's not just a question for me, that's a question for all of us. And I think it's honestly a question this church has struggled with for a long time. And the question goes like this, like, how do we welcome the apartment community, or how do we serve the apartment community? Yes. And it's a really, really tough question because there's a lot of presuppositions involved in that question, most of which are pretty good. And I think that's, well, that's what I want to say. And then now I want to see what everybody else thinks about that instead of me just answering that. Ellen, I see you.
Okay. I think that's a certainly valid question. And we have wrestled with it at a moderately deep level from time to time about the apartment community in general. And as we're looking at this ministry opportunity here, in addition to Hispanic ministry, where do we see, maybe we can't do everything all at one time for everybody. Maybe we can talk some about the greatest gaps or holes we have in our community that we could seek to meet.
Yeah.
Where do you see the greatest holes in the community? What do you mean by that?
Well, we speak of for example, the apartment community.
Yes. Okay.
That apartment community has many components. Are they the ones we need to help? Are they single parents? Are they Hispanic? Are they African American? What are the places that we're best able, at least to start off and fill the needs, meet somebody's needs? I'm not saying it's not the Hispanic community.
No, I understand.
But we can't do everything. And as we talk through this, maybe we can identify some areas where we feel that we could help to spread the word.
Yeah. Susan, please.
I have felt for a long time that there is a need for reasonably priced healthcare for the community. I really feel that is a big need, and in particular, pregnant women and children, to provide the health. I mean, I have come across women who cannot take their kids to the doctor because they can't afford it.
Yeah.
So that is a concern of mine, that maybe this community, and I have no idea how we would go about, meeting those needs, but that's a concern that I have for the community.
We have an obvious gap here that we're working hard, and COVID interrupted, which is regrowing our family ministry program. And COVID's been really frustrating because we had a lot of natural growth and we were ready to make a hire and we had great applicants, and I'm glad we didn't hire one because we'd have had to furlough them. But getting back on track, it's just, and I guess everybody's in the same position. But look, I'm going to name we have that need, and it's not a surprise. We know it. We've budgeted for it. We want to go forward, but that's a need. Gracia de Spanish is a tough thing because I had the sense that it would be really helpful for people to know, especially who grew up in the Roman community, like you can be divorced and you can have communion here. That seems important to know, right? Or we'll do things like celebrate your marriage, like we'll do that. And your kids are gay and that's all right. Like my sense is that like that is a hole in the community, is that there's not only do we need, I think people understand, particularly with the national stage, the Episcopal Church is like your best hope if you don't fit the traditional box, but there is not that need in our community in a Spanish speaking language. So the other churches in the neighborhood, God bless them, they're great places, I'm sure, unless you're gay or divorced, right? So we're like the only hope for those folks, and we don't have Spanish service because I don't do Spanish. You know, I do German. I could do some biblical Greek that I don't even know how to pronounce myself all the time. So it's a need and a gap, Graciela, and I do respect that. You know, I've had some hopeful things show up on the plate, and part of it is, you know, this is a hard thing about a church that, and look, we're all in this together, but you know, like we're just catching up on 25 years of deferred maintenance here, and it's expensive, you know, and I've got a clergy friend that I love who's fluent in Spanish, Jim McGill. He's the one who fills in for me afterwards. So I could either have to learn Spanish or look, we've got somebody else who does it. But how we build that ministry and how we fund it, that's important, right? We've got a Latinx guy who's covered with tattoos and physically strong. And he came in here to talk about, could he mow the grass? And he said, I don't want to mow the grass, but I'll do whatever I need to do what I want to do. Love that response. And I said, well, what do you want to do? Yeah. He said, well, look, when I was driving here, I drove by these apartments and I grew up in places like that. I could just tell by looking at them. So what I'd love to do is go door to door, knocking on these doors, and I would be happy to do it and tell these parents, look, I know your kids are hanging out after school alone. I'll train them, like I'll be their personal trainer over here at this huge campus that has 3 acres with a lake view. And I'll give them something to do, and I'll teach them physical respect, and you know, I'll mentor them that way, because my biggest priority in life is not going back to jail, you know. And so like I heard that, and it was like the very first time since I've been here that I heard somebody with an idea of how to invite people from the apartments that I thought would work. But, you know, like Ellen said, there's NASA contractors live in these apartments. I mean, there's people who are making $100,000 live in these apartments, right? So it's not just Latinx or Black folk or people who are economically depressed. It's a really mixed bag. And, you know, part of, I think, what we have struggled with the church is like, and this book, I think, is designed, speaking of our hope, Tim, is to help us become a little easier with like, how do we meaningfully invite people? Because think how, in some ways, dehumanizing it is to say like, knock, knock, knock. Hey, we're from that middle class parish over there. How can we help you? Because the implication is you poor folks need our help, and we're going to be the great white hope for you. And look, I know that's not the spirit. I know that's not the spirit. But the question is, how do we make a meaningful invitation instead of a token one? And that's tough. The invitations that I'm so used to church are, there's something wrong with you, so come over here and we'll fix you. And that's not a great invitation to me. So we got to figure, you know, we got to figure that out a little bit.
When I first made my original comment, I was, there's no doubt all those things you said, it's a very difficult, I just think, gosh, as a Hispanic, as a Chicana who's married to an Anglo, you know, I have in some ways the best of 2 worlds, and my life has been like that, and I can go back and forth between languages and between the people, but how on earth can you open up your heart to, because there's no doubt amongst the Hispanics too, they're going to be very cautious and understandably so. And they're not going to totally trust. It's not, you know, it's like, you know, who the heck does this woman think she is? It's so complicated.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think it's complicated.
Yeah. So invite, welcome, and connect. How do you do that?
Yeah, again, you've named the Tim's question, like what's the hope of doing this together, is that we'll figure out either a different nuance to do what we're already doing, or a way to extend what we're doing, or we just need to like change some of what we're doing. You know, I mean, it could be any combination of those.
Overall, Mike, I want to say that I love being at St. Thomas. I love it. I grew up I was a cradle Catholic Church, did all of that. And the Catholic Church continued at St. Bees, but St. Thomas has been wonderful. It's been a welcoming.
See, my sense is that we all feel that way, right? And the question is, I think, how do we take what we're really experiencing and enjoying and appreciating, and how do we sort of open that up? And of course, I think what we all realize is, scale matters. And like when you get a large scale, like let's pretend 100 more people started coming to church, it would really change what we have, even if all those people looked like us, but especially if they didn't, right? It would be uncomfortable. And so part of it is thinking through like, well, okay, sometimes we say like, well, what we really want is more growth. And my question is like, well, why do you want that? And what does that word even mean to you? You want more money, or you want more cheeks in the seats? And do you want more stories to listen to? She says this interesting phrase in the book that the heart of evangelism is sharing, but I heard our bishop say the heart of evangelism is listening. So I think that's an important conversation, and once upon a time, I went to a different church, and there was a lady who led service for the diocese, and she was on the bishop's committee. And, in my own little way, we had this like joking relationship that she was this really important person in the diocese. And I would always say, like, am I going to get in trouble with the bishop for doing this and that, and one day she said, look, man, I don't really know what I believe, but these are really nice people, and they're generous, and I see them caring about other people. So I sense coming here is good for me. And that was the wrong answer, because it didn't say, I believe in Jesus and heaven and hell and the devil and all of that. And it was the best answer I think I've ever heard, because it was hers, and figuring out how we make room for that. Like, you're invited to be who you are instead of who we are, and thereby to change us. This is like important. Let me ask you one last question, which she asks in chapter 2, and I know we're short time, and you may not have an answer for it today, and it's not a forced share. What about our service or church would most worry you when thinking about inviting a guest? What about our service or our church would most worry you when you think about inviting a guest? Julia, please.
I think the children's ministry.
Mm-hmm.
Like if I'm thinking about who my peers are.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love the fact that my kids are allowed in the service, and you don't care if they yell and scream. But like, I can't pay attention,
Right. Right. Thank you.
Well, I think the scariest thing I would think about would be, you don't know what to do when.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's really helpful.
Yes. Communion, that is absolutely the central and most important part of the entire Mass, that a visitor or a stranger would just not know what to do, where to go, where to move. And you're always very good, Mike, about, you say the same thing, move to the right side and stand here and all of that. And I appreciate you're going through that every single time. I really do, because I think there could be somebody out there that would have no clue exactly what to do.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm just going to say, probably because I'm real sensitive, I'm always worried that something I enjoy, somebody else won't enjoy, and then that might hurt the relationship, Because if I think something's really great and somebody doesn't like what I like, it's sort of like, well, where do we go now? Especially with something that I think so personal. So that's part of my worry. Carolyn?
I'd like to go back to Julia's question or comment about the children's ministry. It's been 25 years since I've had kids. in children's ministry, 30 years. And so I guess I don't know what we provide for children. I don't.
Well, I
that-
can tell you right now, we don't provide much because of COVID. But
Oh, yeah,
you know, what
understood.
we were doing that I thought was actually pretty nice was we had godly play during the sermon time, and then kids came in for communion, and that little group grew from like 8 kids to 15 kids doing it, and it was like a one-room schoolhouse. But these are good volunteers, and they show up and they're committed, and you know, our vision, of course, is that we're going to have this new program person who's not only going to support kids, but support parents and support youth. And the goal is not that they're going to do all of that, but they're going to be a point person coordinating that. We're this great sized church, right, where we're small, but there is also like a ton of work to do, especially like keeping social media and bookkeeping and outreach. And, you know, like there's just a lot to do. And so I'm optimistic, real optimistic, Julia, that we're going to, I don't say solve that, but I see a solution, like a way we're pursuing that solution, because I agree. I mean, there's nothing for my daughter to do. And so for the last year, she hasn't come to church because she'd be here a long time, just kind of sitting around. And that's tough because the girl wants to go. You know, I'm really happy we're starting acolyting again, and my daughter's old enough to do that. I'm really happy that kids can sort food at these food distributions. But there is growing in that regularity, and we know that's a need. And hopefully this new hire that we budgeted for, even though it's a stretch, you know, it's in our budget. I hope that person arrives quickly. We have not hired that person yet. We're still, frankly, waiting on more applications so we can find the right person. Because as all you guys all know, the worst thing you can do is hire the wrong fit. And so we're being slow a little bit on purpose because we really need the right fit. Is there anything else that would make you worried, anxious, stressed about inviting people to the church we have?
You got to go to mass.
Okay. Well, I'm grateful. We'll pick up next week with chapter 2. We'll go back through there, and I will give us more time to deal directly with the book. I hope the questions I'm asking are okay questions. To me, they came right out of the reading, but maybe we want to have a little more in-depth in-text response. And so sorry if I took over with those questions, but we'll pick up next week. And I'm grateful for your honesty and your thoughtfulness, and honestly, you're sharing parts of your heart today. So I will see you next week.